Alright, vlog 15, my religious background. And this is going to be a really hard vlog or video for me to make just because, one, it's not something I really like to talk about in any detail. And also, it's a little bit hard to remember all the exact details because it was, good 20 years ago or so in my past, and this all happened to me from age 0 to age 16 largely. But I was born into a religion or a church called the Worldwide Church of God, founded by Herbert W. Armstrong, who in the church was considered an apostle of God, a prophet of sorts. Definitely his writings were, I would say, as important or as referred to reverently as books of the Bible to a certain degree. This is a person that predicted the end of days definitively in matters of years, of course, that did not happen. In fact, my parents were both in the church, and that's how they met. And I was actually conceived in anticipation of end times, that I would be born before that happened, so I could be saved. And the religion was very much like it was very similar to Seventh-day Adventists in many ways. In fact, it was I think kind of a sect of that, even though the church itself thought of it as unique, the only true Christians. Everyone else was kind of false believers, and there wasn't really much distinction between Catholics and Muslims or Hindus. They were all wrong, fundamentally so, and there was a very much strict adherence to the religion that they preached, and everyone else was distinct. It was definitely in end times. It was very much talked about openly. The world would end, certainly in our lifetimes, and that was very much a dominant theme in my life, that the world was going to be destroyed mainly, and that we, a small group of people, it was kind of much in the way I guess the Mormons believe, that they believe the United States is literally Israel, the people of Israel, I should say, and that they were going to be saved because that's end time prophecy talks about that in Revelation. And yes, it was a very strict religion. I didn't. It was first of all, we kept the Sabbath, which was sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, I should say, and very much old school. Kept many of the Jewish holidays, even though they were under different names, but very much a strict adherence of the Bible. Didn't celebrate Christmas, didn't celebrate Easter, didn't celebrate birthdays, anything like that. It's just a strange collection of holidays that were primarily Jewish, but a very strong adherence to the New Testament as well. They're very much a strong belief in Jesus, a belief that Jesus and God were separate entities in some ways, had separate minds. So it wasn't really even technically traditional monotheism, although Trinity and other versions of religion is debatable whether that's monotheism. Of course, they'll want to believe that, but yeah, it was very hard as a little kid to be a part of this. I mean, women, you couldn't have long hair, of course. Women weren't allowed to wear makeup. You were supposed to tithe 10% of your income or more before taxes to the church, which would put a tremendous strain on a very poor congregation. I mean, this wasn't a small church. This was, when I went there, 150,000 people worldwide that were adherents to this. So it was not a small time venture. It was fairly significant, and especially in terms of the money. And I mean, one of the how strict it was is that there wasn't, as a child, I wasn't allowed to play on the Sabbath. I wasn't allowed to do anything that I wanted to do. It was about going to church and being, if it wasn't at church, being somber and still. And that's my memory of going to church, was just this kind of tremendous guilt of not being able to play. And just, I mean, it's sad to think about now, but it was just, that was the way things were. I mean, that's when your family sets down those rules, and there's an expectation and a tremendous amount of guilt if you don't obey those rules. We didn't eat pork, very much, again, strict adherence, not to kosher, but something very similar to that. No clean and unclean meats, back, I think, in Leviticus. And yeah, it was very hard. My mom quit attending and kind of became independent, really, of religion. She wasn't a non-believer or anything, but just didn't really talk about religion once she stopped, which caused a major rift between my father and her. My dad was uh, very much in here and was hell bent on making me, you know, through it, essentially, and not lose any faith. And it put a lot of stress, I know, on my parents' marriage. I mean, it was just such a different way of living. If you weren't in that, you were either the inside or the outside. And there was very much, growing up, there was an idea that end times were coming, and as my mom wasn't attending, that when end times would happen, that she would be killed and annihilated in nuclear war, essentially. And it wasn't like that she was going to go to hell. There wasn't a concept of heaven or hell. When people died, they died. And then everyone would be resurrected, after, kind of end times had occurred, and have kind of a second chance. And if they screwed up that second chance, they would not go to hell. They would just be annihilated and destroyed forever. So that's kind of how I thought about my mom. I was taught to think about my mom growing up, that was, fairly traumatic to kind of think about that as not just could happen, but is going to happen, and hope that she would kind of see the light, so to speak. But it was definitely a weird thing. I mean, and there's also a belief too that since end times were coming, that I would never die, that I would be spared, and that today has changed. It affected my ideas of my own mortality when you're taught that you're not going to die, and then when you change those beliefs and you realize that you do, that's a very hard transition to make, psychologically or emotionally. I have talked to people that have been raised atheist by their parents, and they don't have seemingly as much of a angst about mortality as I do, and the uncomfortableness of that idea and that fact. So there's that. It was just a crazy time. It was this very old school religion in a lot of ways. I mean, just very fire and brimstone, not a lot of love, not a lot of Jesus in your life type talk at all. More just fear of God's wrath and the fact that people are inherently wicked without God being intrinsically in the center of their life. That was a huge theme of the waywardness and the wickedness of human beings, and the cult-like mentality the church had of not trusting anyone really outside the church. I mean, it wasn't a compound or anything like that, like you could read about or see on, like, say, Big Love or something like that. It wasn't like that to that degree, but I'd say it's one step removed from that. But there was definitely a psychological pressure of no dating outside the church. No, you shouldn't really even have friends outside the church. And of course, this all existed to prevent people from being kind of tempted away, essentially. There's that psychological grip that it had on people. And not all my friends were of that religion. I mean, I went to a public school, which was very, that definitely gave me a look to the outside world. And I didn't, again, this is all when I was little, so I didn't really act out on a lot of these instructions, literally, where I just had contempt for everyone that wasn't in the church. I'm, anywhere between 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, teenager, and very much wanting to be a part of the world as well, because that was where the fun was, to a large degree. Not that I say I never had fun in church or with people that were members. I mean, I did, and there were things that we did on Sunday that were, enjoyable as kids, and were, kind of community building type exercises of sports and picnics and all that kind of stuff, But yeah, it's been a crazy. It was a crazy time, and my mom dropped out and kind of became a little bit of an anchor to the outside world that I wonder if that had never happened and both my parents were still ardent members, that I would still be attending myself. My cousin is still very much a believer and teaches everything that I've talked about. I know that he and his wife are teaching his 3 little girls, and to me that makes me very sad, and really makes me kind of do the things that I do to speak out against this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean that's just a very very quick overview of it. But yeah, it was. I mean, I guess lack of a better term, it was pretty awful and horrific at times, and it makes me sad that people still think these things are worse. So see you tomorrow.